I came face to face with the railroad killer and I got away. I was 19 years old, burning the midnight oil in the college darkroom, developing film for my photography class. The photography building, a former tobacco warehouse, stood as a dark, rickety hulk near some desolate railroad tracks in a rarely visited corner of campus. I wrapped up my developing work close to midnight and ventured out, always a little spooked being alone at night in that deserted part of town. It was pitch black. Several of the streetlights around the parking lot were busted, and the few that were still working were barely putting out a weak, flickering light that did little to reassure me. As I made my way toward my car, I heard him before I saw him, the sound of shoes scraping on the asphalt. "Hey, can you do me a favor?" he asked. I jumped, startled, and dropped my keys. He mumbled an apology for scaring me like that. I noticed he was wearing a jogging suit and had a noticeable limp. "What do you need?" I asked cautiously. He hobbled a step or two closer. "I think I sprained my ankle pretty bad. Could you give me a ride to the ER?" The university hospital wasn't far down the road. I hesitated, unsure. The guy seemed harmless enough and he did appear to be in pain. But I had recently finished reading a book about serial killer Ted Bundy, who lured some of his victims by pretending to have a broken arm and asking for help carrying books to his car. The book described how, when they leaned over to put his stuff in the passenger seat of his Volkswagen Bug, he would knock them unconscious with a crowbar and stuff them inside. This chilling scene flashed through my mind as I looked at the guy. It also made me wonder why anyone in their right mind would want to go jogging in this creepy part of town. "I'm sorry, I can't do that," I said firmly. "But I could call someone for you. There's a phone in the photography building right over there." "There's nobody to call," he replied, his voice tinged with desperation. "I just moved here. I don't really know anybody. Can't you just drive me? It's right down Limestone Avenue." He leaned against a car and winced as he reached down to rub at his ankle, feigning pain. "I will call you an ambulance," I offered, my voice trembling slightly. "No, I can't afford that. I don't have health insurance. Can you just drive me? I'll pay you $20. There was something off about the way he said that last part, something unnatural, like that acting exercise where we had to recite "Mary Had a Little Lamb," as though we were delivering a tragic monologue or a furious rant. There was a rising tone that didn't quite match the words he was saying, a raw urgency that reached down inside me and slammed the panic button hard. A moment of silence hung heavy between us. "I can't help you," I stated. "I am leaving now." I gripped my keys tightly, slipping them between my fingers the way my mom had taught me, so I could use them as a weapon if he came at me. I kept my eyes locked on him as I speed-walked the last few feet to my car. He watched me drive away, still leaning against that car, a flat, emotionless expression on his face. Away from the dark parking lot, driving through campus with my music turned up loud, the fear began to fade. I even started to feel a little guilty for leaving the guy there alone. Although I knew I had done what my mom and dad would have wanted me to do, I was just about to pull into my dorm parking lot when I realized I needed to pick up some things for breakfast the next morning. So, I turned around and headed back in the direction I had come. About a minute down the road, my stomach clenched in a knot of fear. There was the guy in the jogging suit, running along the sidewalk with ease. His ankle was perfectly fine. There was no limp whatsoever. Later that summer, 2 students at my college were attacked near those same railroad tracks. The girl survived the ordeal, but her boyfriend tragically died. The man who attacked them was a serial killer who was dubbed the Railroad Killer by the police. He murdered dozens of people across several states, most of them near railroad tracks. I didn't see his mugshot on TV until years later, but the picture sent a shiver down my spine and broke me out in the same icy sweat I felt the night I saw that guy running down the street. I can't be 100% positive, but my gut tells me I escaped a serial killer that night. These incidents started about 6 years ago and went on for a couple of years. I used to be really into the music scene, going to shows and festivals every chance I got. This often meant meeting random people whose names I would forget 5 seconds later, and so on. As a result of being out in Atlanta nightlife so often, I got frequent friend requests on Facebook, and naive younger me blindly accepted them, assuming they were just people I had met at shows that I was too drunk or distracted to remember. One day, I got a message from someone named Eddie. His Facebook profile picture was of someone at least a decade older than me with long, scraggly hair. He looked harmless enough, just another show-going hippie, I assumed. His message simply asked if Atlantic I was the girl who danced a half-circle around him at the local show last night and then twirled dreamily away, or something along those lines. This was back in 2012, so I don't remember the exact words. I responded that I had no recollection of that and, upon further investigation, saw that he lived in an entirely different state, so it could not have been me. He said that Atlantic I must have had a doppelganger out there somewhere, and I left the conversation at that. Over the next few months, Atlantic I would get random notifications. He'd messaged Atlantic I, asking if Atlantic I would be at various shows across the Southeast and so on. Atlantic I mostly ignored those messages but would very occasionally respond, shortly expressing interest in a band he had mentioned, just trying to be polite. Why younger Atlantic I felt the need to be polite to everyone is beyond Atlantic I now. Atlantic I have since learned that it is okay not to respond to persistent internet strangers. The messages became more and more frequent, so Atlantic I just started to leave them unread. Again, why Atlantic I didn't block him is beyond Atlantic I. Atlantic I guess Atlantic I thought he was just harmless and lonely. Fast forward about a year. It was the summer of 2013, and two of Atlantic I's best friends and Atlantic I were caravanning to Wakarusa, a music festival that took place in Ozark, Arkansas. It was about a 13-hour drive from Atlanta, but totally worth it. Atlantic I went every year. An important note here is that this was not some small, intimate festival. It hosted upwards of 40,000 people, and it was often hard to keep track of Atlantic I's friends, let alone find people Atlantic I knew who came separately. So, Atlantic I's friends and Atlantic I were on a blanket in the middle of a huge crowd, watching widespread panic. It was nighttime, so the only lights were coming from the stage, random LED toys, glow sticks, or whatever. Out of nowhere, someone beelined for Atlantic I's blanket, made himself at home next to Atlantic I without permission, and struck up a conversation. Atlantic I's group of friends was generally warm and accepting, and it was not unusual to make random friends at a big hippie fest like this, so Atlantic I thought nothing of it at first. Probably just someone high on ecstasy and looking for company. It was not until they started referencing Atlantic I and Atlantic I's Facebook personally that the alarm bells started going off. This was Eddie. Atlantic I had honestly completely forgotten about him and his persistent messages. And in the darkness, there was no way Atlantic I could have recognized him. He was talking like Atlantic I was an old friend and tried to follow Atlantic I around all night. Once Atlantic I subtly alerted the others about who he was. Atlantic I made every excuse in the book to try to leave, go back to Atlantic I's campsite, and call it a night. He was painfully insistent on following Atlantic I back there and continuing to hang out. Obviously, Atlantic I did not want him to know where Atlantic I slept. So Atlantic I tried to appease him by saying Atlantic I was exhausted but that Atlantic I could try to meet up tomorrow again. Dumb Atlantic I know. Atlantic I was just doing anything Atlantic I could to get him away in the moment and had no intention of actually following through. He finally left Atlantic I alone, and Atlantic I walked along, roundabout way to Atlantic I's campsite just in case he had watched or tried to follow at a distance. The next day, Atlantic I made an avid point to avoid the area where Atlantic I ran into Eddie and discussed meeting up. The festival venue was huge, so Atlantic I figured there was no way he would find Atlantic I again. Atlantic I was beside a small stage in the back corner of the venue, hooping in the woods with Atlantic I's friends. When Atlantic I noticed him out of the corner of Atlantic I's eye, he was standing beside a tree alone, watching Atlantic I with a weird smile. It reminded Atlantic I of a proud dad watching his young daughter play, but with way creepier and more sinister overtones. Still, he had not done or said anything explicitly creepy or threatening. But his presence was so unsettling that Atlantic I grabbed Atlantic I's friends, and Atlantic I pretended that Atlantic I had forgotten about a set that was starting. So Atlantic I ran out of the wooded stage area. Atlantic I remember hoping he did not notice Atlantic I'd seen him. The festival ended the next day, and Atlantic I was relieved not to see him again. Fast forward about another year. At this point, Atlantic I barely used Facebook and had all but forgotten about Eddie. Atlantic I's friend that Atlantic I went to the festival with was visiting from out of town that night, and Atlantic I were going to get some drinks. He got to Atlantic Eye's house, and Atlantic Eye were catching up, and the subject of the festival came up. Atlantic Eye started talking about Eddie and how weird that whole situation was. But at this point, it was less creepy and more of just a strange memory. Atlantic Eye told him Eddie used to message Atlantic Eye all the time, but that Atlantic Eye had stopped opening them years ago. Naturally, Atlantic Eye's friend wanted to look through the messages, so Atlantic Eye obliged. Atlantic Eye began to scroll through the messages, and Atlantic Eye realized just how dire of a mistake it may have been not to block him. He had started by asking Atlantic Eye what shows Atlantic Eye was going to go to, what part of Atlanta Atlantic Eye lived in, and so on, not taking the hint that Atlantic Eye clearly had no interest in responding at that point. Then, as the months went by, he was sending Atlantic Eye links to tickets he had bought for Atlantic Eye to shows in Atlanta, and then links to tickets he had bought for us to go to together. There was one message asking where he could pick Atlantic Eye up for a show that was 2 hours away in Athens and that he couldn't wait to see Atlantic Eye again. The messages continued to go on, but at this point, Atlantic Eye was so creeped out Atlantic Eye immediately blocked him finally and closed the computer wide-eyed. What the actual hell? He sounded like he was carrying on an entire relationship with Atlantic Eye without Atlantic Eye's consent. He never acknowledged the fact that Atlantic Eye literally had not responded to or even seen a message from him in over a year. Shaken up, Atlantic Eye decided to just go get a drink and stop thinking about this weirdo. Atlantic Eye got to Edgewood, a popular bar district in my city, and walked to our favorite small bar to grab a drink. The moment we stepped inside, my heart plummeted. To this day, it remains the creepiest and most bizarre coincidence I've ever experienced. There, at the far end of the bar, sat Eddie. His face lit up the instant he saw me, and he beckoned me over with a wave. He launched into something like, "I can't believe it's you," and immediately peppered me with questions about my life, what I'd been doing, and everything in between. At that moment, a dark feeling washed over me. I felt exposed and deeply unsafe. What was he doing here? He didn't even live in Georgia. I quickly excused myself, saying I needed to use the restroom, but would be right back for a drink. I grabbed my friend, who was equally stunned, and we practically sprinted around the corner to the bathrooms, and then right past them. I will forever be grateful that the door to the patio area was conveniently located just past the bathroom, giving us a head start. We burst outside, hopped the fence, and bolted toward my car. I risked a glance back and saw that Eddie had somehow deduced in those 15 seconds that we had left, even though the bathrooms weren't visible from where he was sitting, and he was striding rapidly across the crosswalk in our direction, his eyes fixed on me. We tore to my car and got the hell out of Edgewood as fast as we could. Shaken, Atlantic Eye drove us around for about an hour before finally heading home, making sure we weren't being followed. As inconclusive as the whole encounter was, that was the last time Atlantic Eye ever saw Eddie. And Atlantic Eye often wonder if it was just a series of odd coincidences or something more sinister. After all, he didn't even live in Georgia. Why was he at one of my favorite bars alone the night Atlantic Eye happened to go through all his old messages? Had he somehow gotten my location through Facebook? Atlantic Eye made sure all my location services were off when Atlantic Eye checked my phone. So, to this day, Atlantic Eye have no idea how he ended up there or what his intentions were. But regardless, Eddie, let's please not meet again. My name is Nolan, and Atlantic Eye am 24 years old now, but when all this happened, Atlantic Eye was just 12. Atlantic Eye live not far from Paris, but Atlantic Eye have loved traveling since Atlantic Eye was a kid. For 5 summers straight, from 2009 to 2013, my mom signed me up for summer camps every July. Those camps were amazing. Atlantic Eye traveled all over France, camping, hiking mountains, doing caving, and rope courses. So many fun activities since Atlantic Eye was young, and Atlantic Eye loved every minute of it. Then came 2013, which turned out to be the worst year of my life and the last time Atlantic Eye went to camp. That summer, the camp was on Isle d'Aleron, an island in western France connected to the mainland by a big bridge. The island is known for being really hot in the summer, with amazing local food, nice beaches, and especially a famous monument called Fort Boyard, an old prison in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean that once held criminals. The camp was set in the middle of nature. Imagine a group of small buildings arranged in an L shape. On one side was the entrance, and on the other was just thick bushes leading into the forest. The buildings were divided between the kids' dorms, the laundry room, the dining hall, and the instructors' dorms. At that time in my life, Atlantic, I was pretty rebellious and didn't like to listen. Two of my friends, Malik and Enzo, came with me. So we were all set for a crazy time, maybe too crazy. Everything was fine during the first 6 days of camp, and we had so much fun. But on the 7th day, things started going wrong, mostly because of us. That night, we had a campfire game session, playing board games like Uno from 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. After that, the instructors announced lights out, and everyone went to their rooms. Malik, Enzo, and Atlantic, I shared a room, so we brushed our teeth and went to bed. About 25 to 30 minutes later, the instructors turned off all the lights. Around midnight, Atlantic, I came up with a terrible idea. A night walk in the forest with my two friends. Even though we were only 12 or 13 years old, we opened our window, looked around quickly, and saw that none of the instructors were awake. They were all asleep, probably too tired after the day's activities. We quietly crossed the camp courtyard, sneaking past the buildings, and entered the bushes on the far side of the site. We walked about 10 to 15 minutes into the forest. While walking, Atlantic, I was joking around and trying to scare my friends with creepy stories. Suddenly, we arrived at the fence of an old abandoned house. The house looked really run down and creepy, like something out of a witch's story. Being young and dumb, we decided to at least go into the garden. To our surprise, the gate was open, so we stepped inside. As soon as we started walking in the garden, we heard a huge, loud scream coming from a man with a deep, scary voice. We were so scared that at first we couldn't even understand what he was yelling. And then the front door of the house under the porch opened, and we saw a man running towards us. We panicked, nearly crying, and instantly reopened the gate behind us. We ran as fast as we could back toward the camp. We managed to get back and woke everyone up in the middle of the night. So stressed, scared, and panicked that I was crying a lot. The instructors obviously scolded us for being reckless and dangerous, but it was clear from our faces that we weren't making it up. We told them what happened and finally went back to our rooms. I couldn't sleep at all that night and kept replaying the scene in my head. One detail stuck with me, thanks to the moonlight. The man limped and had a wooden leg, but even so, he ran really fast. I don't know why, but I had a very bad feeling about the whole thing. I wish that had been the end of the story, but no. On the 9th day, the last day of camp, we were outside doing various activities when the instructor asked if we had our swimsuits ready because we were going to the pool. I said no and that I needed to go get mine from my room. So, I ran alone to the dormitory, about 10 meters away. I opened my door, then closed it behind me for some reason without turning on the light. Inside the room, since we had the shutters closed, it was almost completely dark, but some little holes let in a bit of moonlight. At that moment, about 5 meters from me, I saw a tall, human-like figure standing still. I couldn't see its face, just the silhouette. I didn't understand what was happening, but I was frozen and couldn't move. What felt like an eternity, probably just 5 or 6 seconds, passed. I suddenly turned, opened the door, and ran outside, screaming that someone was in my room. I ran crying towards the center of the camp where everyone was. An instructor immediately went with some colleagues to check my room, but it was empty. Suddenly, the instructors called everyone to come to my room because they found something terrifying. On the floor was a piece of paper with the words, "I will come back tonight," written on it. I literally froze and cried twice as much as before. That night, the instructors stayed in pairs outside every door, so nobody could enter any rooms. Thankfully, no one came back to my room that night. We left camp the next day, but because of those incidents, I never went back to camp after I was 13. Took me a long time to want to travel again with friends or family to places I didn't know. It wasn't until I was 19 that I dared to go on vacation again. When I told my mom about what happened, she told me I was incredibly stupid and brave at the time for my age, and that I did the right thing because whoever was in my room that night didn't mean well, especially with that note left behind. But honestly, going in the forest was so freaking stupid. Like, I don't know why we went in that forest, to be honest. Even 12 years later, questions still haunt me. What the actual hell was that person in my room? Was it the same man who chased us in the forest? What did he want? And how did he find my room? These questions kept me awake many nights, and I had a lot of nightmares. Like I said at the start, even if I mostly laugh about it now, sometimes I still get anxious over small things. So, to the man in the woods who chased us and then appeared in my room, let's never meet again. I live in a farming area, and there are a lot of fields and woodland, so it's not a hard place to find somewhere to walk my dogs off their leads. About 2 years ago, one evening, I had completely forgotten to walk them. It was about 8:30, and it was in October, so it was already dark, but I wasn't too bothered because I know the whole area really well. So, I took my large female boxer dog, who was only a puppy at the time but had insane muscle and was already fully grown in height, and my Chihuahua cross Jack Russell out. I'm a 5 feet 5 inches girl with quite a bit of muscle on me because I did a lot of physical sports, including martial arts, so I could easily protect myself in a fight. Because of this, I thought I didn't need a torch and thought I was safe. I began walking out of my estate and up a hill with my earphones, playing some heavy metal music to get me in the zone for a quick walk on the back fields and then back home. When I reached the top of the hill, which led to another housing estate bordering the fields, I noticed there was no traffic at all, no movement. At this point, it was almost 9 o'clock, and there was nobody to be seen, which I thought was unusual because it's a well-populated area. Besides this, I carried on walking with my little crossbreed biting at the lead with excitement and my boxer trying to attack my shadow. Once we reached the fields, it was almost pitch black. There were no lamp posts. The only light was from the houses that faced the field. I took my boxer off her lead, and as boxers do, she bounded off into the tall grass like a child, whereas my little mutt followed my heels, nipping my jeans to remind me he was still there. After about 5 minutes, my eyes had adjusted to the lighting of the field, and I could see my boxer had stopped a meter ahead of me, staring at something. Instantly, my Jack Russell cross started growling and stood between my legs. I looked up to see a figure standing around 3 meters away from me. I shouted for my boxer to come back to me. As usual, she gets too friendly with strangers and jumps up on them. The instructors, understandably, tore into us for being so reckless and putting ourselves in danger, my tear-streaked face mirroring the sheer terror I felt. We recounted what happened, and finally we retreated to our rooms. Sleep utterly eluded me that night, the scene playing on repeat in my mind. One chilling detail, illuminated by the moon, remained stubbornly fixed. The man's limp, the telltale sign of a wooden leg, yet he moved with unnerving speed. A profound sense of unease settled over me. I desperately wished that was the end of it, but fate had other plans. The 9th day, the camp's last, found us participating in various activities when an instructor inquired if we had our swimsuits, as a pool visit was on the agenda. I replied in the negative, stating I needed to retrieve mine from my room. I hurried alone to the dormitory, a mere 10 meters distant. I opened the door and, inexplicably, closed it behind me without switching on the light. Inside, the closed shutters plunged the room into near-total darkness, pierced only by slivers of moonlight filtering through tiny gaps. And then I saw it. Roughly 5 meters away, a tall, vaguely human figure stood motionless. Its face was indiscernible, just a dark silhouette against the faint light. Disbelief warred with mounting dread, freezing me in place. An eternity, or perhaps a mere 5 or 6 seconds, stretched out. Suddenly, I whirled around, flung open the door, and bolted outside, my screams echoing that someone was in my room. I ran, sobbing, toward the center of the camp, where everyone was gathered. An instructor, accompanied by colleagues, immediately went to investigate my room, only to find it empty. A moment later, they summoned everyone to my room, their faces grim. They had discovered something terrifying. On the floor lay a piece of paper, bearing the chilling words, "I will come back tonight." I froze, my tears now flowing twice as freely. That night, instructors patrolled in pairs outside every door, ensuring no one could enter the rooms. Thankfully, no one returned to my room that night. We departed camp the following day, but those incidents effectively ended my camping days after the age of 13. The desire to travel, even with friends or family, to unfamiliar places vanished for a long time. Not until I was 19 did I dare to venture on vacation again. When I finally confided in my mom, she declared me incredibly stupid and brave for my age, adding that I did the right thing because whoever was in my room that night didn't mean well, especially with that note left behind. But honestly, going in the forest was so freaking stupid. Like, I don't know why we went in that forest, to be honest. Even 12 years later, questions continue to plague me. What the actual hell was that person in my room? Was it the same man who chased us in the forest? What did he want? And how did he find my room? These questions stole my sleep and filled my nights with nightmares. Like I said at the start, even if I mostly laugh about it now, sometimes I still get anxious over small things. So, to the man in the woods who chased us and then appeared in my room, let's never meet again. I live in a farming area, and there are a lot of fields and woodland, so it's not a hard place to find somewhere to walk my dogs off their leads. About 2 years ago, one evening, I had completely forgotten to walk them. It was about 8:30, and it was in October, so it was already dark, but I wasn't too bothered because I know the whole area really well. So, I took my large female boxer dog, who was only a puppy at the time but had insane muscle and was already fully grown in height, and my Chihuahua cross Jack Russell out. As I'm a 5 feet 5 inches girl with quite a bit of muscle on me because I did a lot of physical sports, including martial arts, I felt confident in protecting myself in a fight. Because of this, I thought I didn't need a torch and felt relatively safe. I began walking out of my estate and up a hill with my earphones playing some heavy metal music to get me in the zone for a quick walk on the back fields and then back home. Reaching the hilltop, which overlooked another housing estate bordering the fields, I noticed an eerie stillness. No traffic, no movement. It was nearing 9 p.m., and the absence of anyone was unsettling, considering it was a well-populated area. Shrugging it off, I continued, my little crossbreed tugging eagerly at the lead and my boxer playfully snapping at my shadow. Once we entered the fields, the darkness was almost absolute. No streetlights pierced the gloom. The only illumination came from the distant houses facing the field. Unleashing my boxer, she, as boxers often do, bounded off into the tall grass with childlike enthusiasm, while my small mutt remained glued to my heels, nipping at my jeans to assert his presence. After about 5 minutes, my eyes adjusted to the meager light, and I saw my boxer stop abruptly a meter or so ahead, fixated on something. Instantly, my Jack Russell Cross began growling, positioning himself protectively between my legs. Raising my gaze, I saw a figure standing roughly 3 meters away. I called out for my boxer, wanting her to come back to me. As usual, she gets too friendly with strangers and jumps up on them. Reluctantly, she turned to me and began running back, my eyes never leaving the figure. I called out and apologized for my dogs. I think I said something like, "Sorry, she's only a pup. She thinks everybody wants to play." Nothing, just silence from the figure. I could see that they had long hair and what looked like a long raincoat on. The shoulders were wide. However, I still think it was a woman. Once again, I called out to her, "Are you okay? Did she jump up on you?" Again, nothing. At this point, I could feel her eyes on me and my dogs. My littlest dog began barking and squealing, and my boxer started barking. This horrifying bark I've never heard her produce. It sounded like she was trying to threaten the figure. Then I heard the woman begin laughing malevolently. That's when I lost it. I picked up my little dog and ran, knowing full well my boxer would follow me. Like I said earlier, I do a lot of sports, so I'm fast and don't have too bad stamina. Jumping over the gate with my dog in my arms and my boxer right behind me, I glanced over my shoulder and saw the woman clear as day in full pursuit. I couldn't give you exact details, but all I can tell you is she looked like something straight out of a horror movie. She was grotesque in every sense of the word. At this point, my boxer was running just a little ahead of me. She knew I was running home and that this woman was bad news. She could have bolted, but for whatever reason, she kept a speed that matched mine. Maybe it's the dog's loyal instinct of the pack or something. I don't know. Anyway, by the time I reached the end of the first estate, I slowed to look behind me. Big mistake. There she still was, running quite a distance behind me, but she was coming. At this point, my head was complete mush, but I knew if I went down the route I came from to the field, she would catch up to me. So, I darted to the left at the end of the estate and ran across the road down the street, my boxer right by my side. At this point, my mutt had gone silent and was digging his paws into my arm and chest. I ran like I've never run before. At the end of the street, I turned right, which brought me onto a street next to the opening of my estate. I didn't look behind me until I reached my driveway. I put my mutt down, and he ran with my boxer to the front door of my house. I looked behind me. She wasn't there, but I could hear her laughing. So, I ran to the door, opened it, and slammed it behind me, then bolted it. I turned the porch light off and peered out the little window of the door. She walked straight past the end of my driveway. She hadn't seen me. I told my older sister what happened. She told me it was best we didn't tell our dad, as he probably wouldn't let me walk them alone again. Ever since that night, I rarely forget to walk my dogs before it gets dark out. And when I do, I walk them first thing in the morning after. So, scary lady in the farmer's field, let's not meet again. This happened to me around a year ago, and it still haunts me. At the time, I was a 25-year-old female visiting some friends. It was the middle of the week, but I was on vacation, so I stayed out late, around 1 o'clock or 1:30 in the morning. I got in my car to head home, which is about a 30-minute drive. I live in a small German town on a main street, but it's not very big. At night during the week, there's barely any traffic. Maybe 1 or 2 cars every now and then. That's it. A bit of context that might help. Coming from the direction I drove, you can see down the road for quite a while, maybe 600 to 700 meters, which is something around 2,000 feet. I rent a parking spot in an underground garage shared with 10 other tenants. The garage entrance is tucked away beside the building and somewhat hidden by the surrounding houses. It isn't really visible unless you're standing right in front of it. Anyway, back to the story. I was driving home on a typical spring night. Everything was normal. I pulled into the driveway and stopped for a moment to open the garage door with my remote. Then I backed into my parking spot, which faces the entrance. I left the engine running as I rummaged in the center console. I can't even remember what for. Suddenly, when I looked up, there was a stranger standing there. A man, maybe 45 years old, about 3 meters, that's around 10 feet, in front of my car inside the garage, just staring at me. I was instantly terrified. Reflexively, I hit the lock button on my car. He shouted that I should give him my phone, saying his car had broken down and he needed to make a call. But I hadn't seen any broken down car flashing hazard lights anywhere on the road. No car pulled over. Nothing. I was so frozen in shock that I just stared at him. He seemed to notice how confused I was. He added that the breakdown happened in the next town, which, by the way, is about an hour's walk away. Again, he told me to give him my phone, becoming louder and more aggressive. That's when I realized what he was not wearing. Just knee-length checkered shorts and no shirt. It wasn't freezing outside, but it definitely wasn't warm enough to be standing around half-naked. He stood there. I yelled through the closed window, the glass a fragile barrier, that I couldn't help him and asked him to leave. He, still simmering with anger, retorted, "You don't need to be afraid of me. Just come and give me your phone." I told him I was sorry, but no, and that he absolutely needed to leave, my voice shaking slightly. He stared for a moment longer, a palpable tension hanging in the air, then angrily walked out of the garage. I stayed in my car until the heavy garage door was fully closed, the mechanism grinding slowly. Only then did I turn off the engine, the sudden silence amplifying my unease. I desperately wanted to call a friend, but there was no reception in that concrete box. So, I grabbed my keys, clutching them like a talisman, and every bit of courage I had, and sprinted to the door leading into the apartment hallway. It's a heavy door that sometimes jammed, a frustrating obstacle. Thankfully, not that night. It swung open with unexpected ease. There's also a back entrance from outside to the garage, and I had no idea if that door was locked or if the man knew about it, adding another layer to my fear. Once inside the hallway, I ran to my ground floor apartment, my heart pounding in my chest. The windows are somewhat shielded by a hedge leading to my terrace, offering a small measure of protection, but technically it was still reachable from the street, a chilling thought. Once inside, I locked everything, double-checking each lock, shut all the blinds, creating a sense of artificial security, and just sat there for several minutes, trying to catch my breath, before finally calling a friend. I debated calling the police, my fingers hovering over my phone, but ultimately didn't, thinking they had more urgent matters to deal with since. Actually, the man hadn't physically harmed me. Looking back, I realized that was a mistake in judgment. But honestly, I was just completely rattled, my nerves frayed. I'm usually someone who's happy to help people, but he easily could have asked me to call someone from outside or knock on a door somewhere or anything other than following a young woman into a garage at night half naked. That's just a line crossed. I've never seen him again. Thankfully, a wave of relief washing over me whenever I think about it. But ever since that night, I hate parking there, the memory a constant shadow. I never get out of my car until the garage door is fully closed. The mechanism a comforting sound now. And even then, I'm always on edge, hyper-aware of my surroundings. I'm so grateful I kept the car running and locked the doors, a decision that likely saved me from further harassment. I'm grateful my parking spot is right across from the entrance, so I had a clear view, allowing me to react quickly. I'm grateful the door didn't stick that night, a small blessing in a terrifying situation. And honestly, I'm so grateful I hadn't gotten out of the car earlier. The thought sends shivers down my spine. I really don't want to imagine what could have happened if I had.